Move More 3 Program Design Part 1. So, the first topic of conversation is going to look at stimulus to fatigue ratio. In the pursuit of hypertrophy, which is to grow muscle, the underlying principle is to induce mechanical tension within that target muscle, a key stimulus for muscle growth. However, not all exercises are created equal in their ability to achieve this tension. And I want you to think of mechanical tension like stretching an elastic band, because you are stretching, you are squeezing your muscles when you are resistance training. While some exercises may produce high levels of tension, they can also generate significant systemic fatigue, potentially impeding on recovery and hindering your overall progress. For example, exercises like quarter rep squats may engage specific muscle groups, but often result in disproportionate fatigue due to their partial range of motion or heavy loading. Now, taking a look at an exercise such as a leg extension or a bicep curl, that can isolate the target muscle with relatively low systemic fatigue. Yet the efficacy may be limited by their inability to fully recruit larger muscle groups or by the lack of compound movements. Now, when we take a look at what's optimal for hypertrophy training, it does involve selecting exercises that offer a high degree of tension to that target muscle while minimizing systemic fatigue. And that's going to allow for more frequent and intense training sessions, because if you are choosing exercises or perhaps the volume is too high, then your fatigue is going to slowly creep up and the stimulus to fatigue ratio is going to be significantly outweighed. When we look at exercises like full range of motion squats, bench presses and barbell rows, these are all compound movements, and whilst they are absolutely fantastic for engaging multiple muscle groups, and they do offer substantial mechanical tension, making them highly effective for stimulating muscle growth, they may induce significant fatigue, and their potential for muscle hypertrophy outweighs the fatigue incurred. But then again, they are essential components of a hypertrophy-focused training program. So we need to actually understand the interplay between stimulus and fatigue and actually select exercises accordingly and optimize your own training regime, because one individual may be better suited to a barbell back squat and may not fatigue compared to someone else who completes a barbell back squat, full range of motion, and has a significant amount of fatigue. So that's where exercise selection is crucial, but also a combination of both compound exercises but also isolation exercises to create enough stimulus to grow, but significantly reduce fatigue or perhaps have moderate fatigue so that you're able to recover between sessions or even between sets. So we need to ask ourselves the question, when I'm doing this particular exercise, when I'm engaging in resistance training, does it train the specific muscle? This actually aligns with pull or push, because we need to make sure that the orientation of the target muscle fibers are going to be activated for maximum engagement. So if I'm sat on a bench doing a high incline dumbbell press, we want to make sure that that bench is at a height in which I've aligned the target muscle fiber, which is the clavicular fibers in the upper chest, and that I'm able to bring those dumbbells down safely into a position where that pec is fully stretched, and then return them to the starting position where we shorten that pec. Other things to consider: it's essential to maintain joint integrity. That basically means ensuring that the joint function is not restricted or compromised during the movement. We always want to focus on a full range of motion. So by doing so, the target muscle actually becomes the limiting factor in the lift, not the joint itself, allowing for maximal recruitment and growth. So again, we could go into details behind this, such as full range of motion. If you have an individual that struggles to barbell back squat because they're not hitting depth, whereas you put them on a hack squat and they can complete a full range of motion, this is significantly better for that individual because that target muscle is taken through the full range and the joint function is not restricted compared to doing a barbell back squat. We can also look at the joint in which the target muscle acts. That should be positioned furthest from the line of the resistance force, ensuring optimal leverage and muscle activation. Lastly, exercises should facilitate a large range of motion at the target muscle joint. But again, once we have a comprehensive understanding of muscle stimulation and development, we can actually tweak particular lifts to make sure that we're taking that target muscle for a full range of motion safely and minimize the risk of injury and maximize muscular adaptation. Another thing to consider is, does it match your training ability? Prior to engaging in any exercise whatsoever, it is really essential to assess your mobility and also your movement capabilities without adding any weight or any resistance. This allows you to identify any limitations or restrictions in your range of motion that may affect your ability to perform that exercise safely and effectively. So what you might notice is that you have some individuals in your gym that put plate after plate after plate on the leg press and they quarter rep it. We actually want to make sure that when selecting an exercise, ensure that it complements your existing mobility and movement patterns, aligning with your body's natural capabilities. We want to avoid attempting to force yourself into positions or ranges of motion that you do not currently possess. This can lead to injury or discomfort. We also want to refrain from working with the ranges of motion that you can't control. This is going to compromise the integrity of that movement and again, increase the risk of injury or illness. So instead, focus on working within your active range of motion for that intended muscle group, optimizing muscular engagement and minimizing strain around the surrounding joints and tissues. For example, if we actually take a look at a Romanian deadlift for hamstring training or glute, we want to allow for a slight rounding of the lower back to accommodate that natural lengthening of the hamstrings. In order to do that, we can slightly bend at the knee as well. Similarly, when executing an incline barbell bench press, we want to ensure that the bar touches the chest only when the pectoral muscles are fully lengthened. Now, for some of you, you may not be able to touch your chest at all, and that's what we would refer to as your active range of motion. Therefore, we avoid excessive strain on the shoulders or the chest. If any movement causes pain or discomfort, we want to consider actually switching to a different exercise or modifying the range of motion to alleviate stress on the affected area. So we could argue that machines give us better stability and they are safer compared to free weights, which require a significant amount of stability and also skill, which may not match your training ability. A combination of both is what we would typically recommend, and The first and last thing that we do need to consider, always prioritize your mobility. Respect your body's limitations. Maintain control throughout that movement. And optimize the effectiveness of your workouts and your training sets through minimizing the risk of injury. So there's 3 things that we need to consider when performing an exercise: brace, stabilize, and control. These 3 areas, when delivered efficiently, can minimize unnecessary fatigue. Stability is crucial for ensuring that intended muscles receive the appropriate stimulus without being compromised by excessive fatigue. For instance, if you are someone that enjoys barbell back squatting on a stable surface like the ground compared to using a Bosu ball, it's going to promote better bracing and stability. It's going to result in more effective force transmission through that targeted muscle group. Similarly, exercises like the back squat compared to the hack squat or the standing overhead press versus the seated overhead press, they're going to provide greater stability, allowing for more repeatable movements and accurate tracking of progression over time. So we would actually say that the more stability an exercise requires, the higher the fatigue it can create on the body. So the back squat is an example of this, whereas if we swap it to a hack squat, we may get better work out of this. Braced and stable lifts promote quicker motor learning, which is particularly beneficial for beginners, and it does allow for safer and more efficient skill acquisition. This stability enables the loading of weights adequate for muscle growth by minimizing the learning curve with mastering the movement. It's a lot harder to learn how to barbell back squat than it would be to hack squat. While less braced lifts are acceptable, such as a barbell bench or perhaps a barbell back squat, it's important to ensure that the primary goal of directing a hypertrophy stimulus to the intended muscles is still achievable. So what we mean by that is a less braced lift is something that doesn't directly give you stability. This is the back squat. Overall, we want to prioritize stability and bracing in resistance training, and it comes down to what you enjoy and how we can actually optimize muscular engagement, minimize fatigue, and facilitate more effective progression over time. To use myself as an example, I barbell back squat for over 10 years. I've only recently transitioned to a hack squat. Now, I could argue that having refined my skill, improved my bracing, my stability and my control through the barbell back squat, having squatted over 300 kilos, there's a direct correlation with that and now moving towards a hack squat. Whereas with the hack squat, I do have significantly more control and I'm able to brace and stabilize that a little bit harder just because the machine provides that. I would also argue that a combination of both free weights and machines is going to give you the best results when it comes to building muscle. We also need to question what's the resistance profile like of that machine or that exercise. When we actually understand in a movement you can produce the most force, that's going to be essential for optimizing muscular engagement and promoting hypertrophy effectively. Now, before we go on, I would say that the more stability that you have, the greater the force that you can produce. Therefore, the more contractile units you can recruit within the muscle, therefore the more muscle that you will build. Now, this concept is closely tied to the length-tension relationship of muscles, which dictates that muscles generally produce more force when they are fully lengthened. So in our incline dumbbell press when the pec is fully lengthened and the dumbbells are almost touching my anterior deltoid. Or, as another example, in our barbell back squat, when you come down into the hole and you pause for a second or two. The duration of tension throughout the range of motion is also going to be critical, with maximal tension ideally maintained throughout. So in my incline dumbbell press, ideally I want to be bringing those dumbbells down for 2 to 3 seconds and pausing in that lengthened position rather than speeding through that rep. Likewise with my barbell back squat, I brace, I then stabilize the movement, and I control the descent 2 to 3 seconds in that hole, and then I pause. That's how we're going to create maximal tension. Now, different exercises may challenge muscles at various points in their range of motion. For example, exercises like a barbell hip thrust primarily challenges muscles in the shortened position, while dumbbell curls target muscles at the mid-range, and a dumbbell pec fly emphasizes that lengthened position, where the dumbbells are either side. It is really crucial to ensure that the resistance provided by the weight or the machine matches where you are strongest in that movement and challenges you throughout the entire range of motion. Now, we can consider other areas such as the type of resistance utilized, whether it is free weights or perhaps a pulley-based machine, resistance machines, bands, chain additions. Each type of resistance offers unique strength and resistance profiles, and the goal is to match these profiles as closely as possible to optimize muscle engagement and growth. When we select exercises and resistance modalities that align with the strength and resistance profile of the targeted muscle, you can actually maximize the effectiveness of your training regime and achieve your hypertrophic goals more efficiently. We actually want to match the strength profile of the muscle with the resistance profile of the machine. So to summarize, to maximize the stimulus on the target muscle whilst minimizing overall fatigue, firstly, we need to ensure that the force, that line, that imaginary line of push or pull, align with proper joint mechanics to effectively target the intended muscle group. This alignment optimizes muscle activation while minimizing strain on surrounding joints and tissues. Additionally, training within your active range of motion and respecting your mobility limitations promotes safer and more effective exercise performance, reducing the risk of injury and ensuring optimal engagement. We also want to seek out movements that allow for control through bracing and stabilization, as this enhances stability and facilitates more efficient force transmission through targeted muscles. We also want to consider the strength and resistance profiles of different exercises, selecting movements that match your muscle's ability to generate force through the entire range of motion. When we actually align these factors, you can optimize muscle activation and growth while minimizing unnecessary fatigue. And we also want to pay attention to the big picture in the workouts. Focus on how your muscles contract and what they feel like throughout each movement. Do you feel a strong contraction in that targeted muscle? Are you experiencing a pump as blood flow increases into that muscle? Is the muscle fatigued? By staying in tune with these sensations, you can actually ensure that your workouts are effective, they target that specific muscle group, and they promote hypertrophy and strength gains, minimizing unnecessary fatigue and strain on the body.